The new documentary on quarterback Aaron Rodgers on Netflix, I thought was a very fair and very interesting look into his spiritual journey from reaching the top of his profession, but still desiring more from his life. So he's an athlete who has such a great depth of personality that we're not really accustomed to seeing, specifically in that profession. There might be a lot of these individuals as athletes who have this kind of depth of wanting to go down a spiritual journey, but he's the most public of them that we've seen in the past 5-10 years, and how he diverges from the mainstream thinking, and he does it in a very conscientious and calm manner. He's not radical as the media would want you to believe. He's a very thoughtful individual and a highly intelligent person. So most people like to talk about his ayahuasca ceremonies, and if you've ever attended an ayahuasca ceremony, they're extremely powerful, and it's like doing 4 hours of intense psychotherapy on yourself. So most people want to focus on that, but at the end of the final third episode of the documentary, he goes into a concept that relates directly to how astrology is one of the foundational energetic realities of our material and our spiritual lives. He doesn't relate it to astrology, but I'm going to show you how he is talking about how the forces of human nature are actually astrological principles. So multiple times he references the idea of ego deaths. And these are the key times in his life when he's experienced kind of an epiphany and really starting to move forward in his spiritual progress and his self-perception and his growth as an individual, when he's able to advance in his own understanding of himself. So the idea of an ego death is a very, very common theme in the occult world. And my favorite example to look to is the symbolism of St. George or St. Michael as they kill the dragon. That symbol is generally given to the idea of your higher self, or the more exalted form of yourself, killing the ego and destroying the ego and conquering, having your higher nature conquering your lower nature. But when he's talking in the last portion about the ego deaths, he makes a very important point about the necessity of the ego. For him, it's his presence on the football field. And to be a successful quarterback, you have to have this unwavering confidence in yourself, and to be able to harness those abilities and that extra layer of strength to be extremely tough. And the ego is necessary because if he were just to kill his ego, he wouldn't get that edge, and to be able to be successful, to be able to rise to the top. And he constantly calls himself a perfectionist. He wants to achieve great things in life, and there's nothing to be ashamed of wanting to do great things in life. If you kill your ego, and if you look at your ego as unnecessary, you're not going to have that drive to become a better person, to improve your character, and for him to have success on the football field. So this is true for all people, and I think it's so overlooked, and it can be very harmful if people look at their ego as kind of an enemy or as unnecessary. And the ego is demonized by many people. I mean, looking at the symbol itself, it's a dragon, and it's kind of a demon, it's the devil. And people think about the ego as the dark side of your personality, but it's not a dark side. It's a core aspect of ourselves as energetic beings on earth. So in that portion, he talks about these two elements of the personality. He says the ego and the observer. So the observer is the aspect of our personality that can see ourselves from an objective point of view, from a higher perspective, or being able to detach from your ego, to be able to detach from yourself and see yourself as another person would see you, or on a deeper level, when you think about it, as how your higher self or your soul would see you, looking down on your current behaviors and how your ego is behaving. So it's this ability, the observer part of us is this ability to dissociate from our ego and to be as objective as possible on who we are, to make assessments about who we are and where we are on our life path. So what Aaron is talking about, it's a very simple astrological concept, that we have a solar conscious within us, which is the observer, and that we have a lunar consciousness within us, which is the ego. So the sun and the moon and the observer and the ego are meant to complement one another. They're supposed to be flowing in harmony. That's how we can be healthy individuals. So the solar consciousness is this ability to enter into contact with the divinity within us, this immortal soul that we have. In Portuguese and Spanish, the sun is the word SOL, soul. And it is the part of us that is our soul. It's our ability to get in contact with this divinity that is within us, that lives in our heart. and to understand that we all are this piece of divinity from an objective standpoint. Everyone has divinity within them. So the observer, or the soul, or the sun within us, it's seeing ourselves from this higher perspective. And throughout life, we get closer and closer to being able to express the purity of our soul and to express it outwardly into the world in order to make the world a better place. So little by little throughout life, when we have a healthy solar consciousness, when our sun is healthy in our chart, but we are working on our sun, we are removing impurities that are covering that pure expression that is possible to be able to express the divinity outwardly. That's what solar consciousness is doing within us. That's what it wants for us to be doing. The ego is the moon in our astrological energetic self. So we all have an ego, and we all have preferences, we all have desires, we all have specific needs that we want to be met. And we all have this core uniqueness that we are a separate person from every other person. So while we're all the same, we all have this divine soul, we're all the same in that way, we're all also very different. We all have this ego, this differentness from everybody else. So there are times when our ego consciousness throughout the day is absolutely necessary. And then there are other times when we're meant to dive into our observer consciousness, our solar consciousness, say it be through meditation, or to go into a retreat, to get in closer contact with that divinity within you, that part of yourself that is not dealing with everyday desires and needs, or the seeing ourselves from a unique perspective and saying, I like to do this, or this is what I have to do. You know, the ego being our separate personality, our specific personality. There are times in the day when that's extremely necessary and useful, but there are other times in the day, even before we go to bed, to reconnect with our divinity, to meditate before we go to sleep. And so the ego and the observer, the sun and the moon, are meant to be flowing, and we use them at different times of the day and at different times in our life. So when Aaron goes on a retreat, he's going in order to, say, harmonize both of those energies within him, to learn more about who he is, to see his ego from a different perspective, but also to discover deeper truths about himself, to be able to also see the divinity in other people that are participating in ceremonies. You can ask him what he is learning in all these different ceremonies that he does, but as you can see, we gain the ability to use both at a higher level if you take spiritual practices seriously. And one thing that should not be forgotten is that you can't remove one or the other. So the big problem, the imbalances that we see in people in the world today, is the imbalances of the solar and lunar forces. Way too much of one or way too much of the other. And so, for example, if we were to only use the observer, excessive solar consciousness in our daily life, we would be so detached from our practical mundane reality that we wouldn't be able to get many things done. We wouldn't be able to function and complete the tasks that lead to a stable life. And the only thing you would end up realizing is that I'm just going to move off into the woods, become a hermit, and meditate for the rest of my life and just not deal with the material world whatsoever. But this is not the most fulfilling solution, at least during this period of time. We all have a certain life's mission. So some people would say that and especially if you look into the Vedic texts and the Srimad Bhagavatam, the only answer to life is to go into the woods and meditate on Vishnu, on Krishna. Well, that might have been true in that period of time, but in this modern age, we all have different samskaras to live out. We all have different experiences that our soul has come here to live through. And by going and removing ourselves and being the observer in the woods to only reflect on our soul is not going to lead to a fulfillment of what our soul is here to come to do, to live the ego experience. There's a purpose to our ego experience. And basically, we're growing in knowledge to all of the varieties of human experience. And when you just retreat into the woods, you're not actively engaging in life and learning and developing your character and evolving. So we need the ego in order to navigate the world and to be able to accept and to trust that we're all unique individuals and that we all have needs and desires that are different from everyone else's. We can share similarities, but it's important to understand that nobody is special, but everybody is unique. So our ego is the core of our uniqueness, our differentness. We all have something to contribute. And we have to harness our ego in a healthy way in order to fulfill our soul's mission in this lifetime, the plan that we have for this incarnation. So a healthy ego consciousness is what's needed, which means a healthy lunar consciousness to understand our psychology, to understand who we are to other people in social situations, how to allow things to grow into our life, how to allow things to not necessarily to say to decay, but how to have things come to ends, the understanding of this flow of life. This is a healthy lunar consciousness, which is a healthy ego. So instead of destroying the ego, we have to learn to come to terms with it being a fundamental force of human nature within us, that exists within us for a specific reason. So what is so commendable about Aaron Rodgers' story of spiritual awakening is that he evolved out of a dogmatic worldview that he was raised in Christianity, where you either go to hell or you go to heaven, and there's no gray area, there's no in between. And so what's interesting is that coming into his own as a football player, he kind of entered into this own dogmatic world of the media where he had to kind of find his own place and to be himself in a very structured and strict world of public exposure with rules. And being in the business of in the NFL, they don't just allow you to express your personality in any which way that you want. They have a paradigm that they want you to fit in. So Aaron had been demonized in the media for essentially thinking for himself and for being cautious about what he puts into his body, and for standing for his belief of body autonomy, or his right to body autonomy under extremely intense public pressure. So that point in his life in 2021 was a huge decision point for him when he embraced his ego in a healthy way, when he wanted something different for his life, and that understanding that he had a valid perspective, and that perspective deserved to be considered. How he saw the world, his perception of the world, his lunar consciousness was valid. And he said, yes, this is valid. I'm not going to be afraid to express that. He had a different perspective. Everyone was expected to fall in line. You do, and you perceive the world in this way. And he said, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to express what I believe and how I see the world, and even if it's not going to be tolerated. But that is it's an amazing kind of place to find yourself in. Most people aren't in that kind of situation where so many eyes are on you and there's so much pressure, and then choosing to be true to yourself. And that means being true to your ego, and to understand your ego on a deeper level, and not to betray what you really believe and how you really see things, just so that you can be accepted by society. And you can see that throughout his spiritual searching in his ayahuasca ceremonies, but also in his darkness ceremonies that he did in Costa Rica. I think the other one was in Wyoming. Well, it seems to me he's become a much more balanced person, where he's able to weigh the needs of his ego and his desire to play football and do what he really loves to do, to be playing every Sunday. That's a personal preference. Not everyone wants to be what he does, but that's where he finds fulfillment and joy and love in his life. Being a team leader and doing that's his mission on a specific material level. But then there's this other desire of his to get into closer contact with his divine self, to see divinity within himself and around him and in other people, and to get a clearer picture of who he is, what his soul's journey is. At least this is how I'm interpreting what he was doing. When he goes on that spiritual path and does these different kinds of techniques, he is seeking to harmonize these different impulses within himself, not just to know himself more, but to get into closer contact with divinity within himself more. So just like Aaron Rodgers, we all have these two forces working within us: the solar and lunar force, the observer force, to be able to see ourselves objectively, and then also our completely subjective experience, our ego, lunar force. So we have to really balance them out. What does my ego want? What does my soul want? And oftentimes they're in opposition, and it can be very painful to have to let go of things that our ego wants for the sake of a bigger and a higher plan for our life, to do take the more divine path and follow what our soul wants us to do. But at the same time, our ego has to be understood as necessary to getting us through the practicalities of life, and to love ourselves. In order to love ourselves, we have to love the part of ourselves that is different. And to be able to love ourselves in that kind of way, we're able to go deeper into seeing other people on a deeper level. And that's when we can start to see the soul in other people. And so that's how we can become healthier, more productive, and ultimately more fulfilled individuals when we seek that harmony between the solar and the lunar forces within us.